Thank you, but I cannot accept. You've already risked too much just in speaking to me.
For more than half a century, Michael Caine has been an open book. The accent never softened. The opinions were never filtered. The stories, usually sharp, funny, and brutally honest, poured out easily. Or, at least, that's what everyone thought. But there was one part of his life he never touched. Not in interviews, not in memoirs, not even when the spotlight was kind. It stayed sealed, guarded quietly for 45 years, hidden in plain sight behind the jokes and the confidence. Now, at 92, Michael Caine has finally decided to say it out loud. Not because he has to, not because anyone forced his hand, but because time has a way of changing what feels safe to carry alone. So, what was the secret he protected for decades? And why did he choose now to finally let it go? Join us as we uncover what Michael Caine kept hidden for 45 years, and the moment he finally chose to confess. Michael Caine's difficult childhood. Long before the confidence, the sharp wit, and the voice that never once tried to blend in, Michael Caine entered the world under a different name entirely: Maurice Joseph Micklewhite. Born on 14th March 1933 at St. Olave's Hospital in Rotherhithe, South London, into a life that offered no shortcuts and no safety nets. His mother, Ellen, worked wherever she could, cooking, cleaning, doing what needed to be done. His father, also Maurice, hauled fish at the market, carrying the weight of long days and harder nights. Irish traveler roots on one side, Protestant faith on the other. From the beginning, his world was layered, complicated, and tense. He wasn't an only child finding his way alone. There was Stanley, his younger brother, who would later follow him into acting, and David, an older half-brother from his mother's first marriage. Family wasn't something romantic or distant. It was close, crowded, and constant. And then the war arrived, ripping through London and scattering families like debris. While bombs fell, young Maurice was evacuated nearly 100 miles away to North Runcton, Norfolk, a village, a school hall, a borrowed stage. That was where he first acted, not in front of critics or cameras, but classmates. He even had a horse named Lottie, a small, strange pocket of calm in a childhood already shaped by disruption. When the war ended, his father came home, and the family returned to a city that barely looked like itself anymore. London was broken open by the Blitz, and so they were placed in a prefab house in Marshall Gardens near Elephant and Castle. Temporary, they were told, just until the city rebuilt itself. Temporary stretched into 18 years, but compared to the cramped flat they'd known before, with its outdoor toilet and no breathing room, it felt like a miracle. Years later, Caine would admit that those prefabs, meant as a stopgap, felt like luxury. Perspective, even then, was something he understood early. At 10 years old, he stepped into a school play, cast as the father of the ugly sisters in Cinderella. It should have been forgettable. Instead, his trousers betrayed him. The zip was down. The audience laughed. And rather than shrink or freeze, something clicked. The laughter didn't humiliate him. It lit a fuse. In that moment, surrounded by noise and embarrassment, he realized he wanted this. The stage, the reaction, the attention that didn't come quietly, but hit you all at once. By 11, he'd passed the exam that changed the direction of his life, earning a scholarship to Hackney Downs School. A year later, he moved again, this time to Wilson School in Camberwell. Education mattered, but survival mattered more. At 16, he left with certificates in 6 subjects and no illusions about how hard the road ahead would be. There was no leap straight into stardom, no fairy tale beginning. He worked as a filing clerk, ran messages, hovered on the edges of the film world, first at a company in Victoria, then for producer J. Lewis on Wardour Street, close enough to see the dream, far enough away to know it wasn't guaranteed. Nothing about those years hinted at legends or awards or red carpets. Just a boy moving through rubble, prefab walls, school halls, and office corridors, slowly learning how to stand his ground. Long before Michael Caine became a name the world trusted, Maurice Micklewhite was already building the backbone that would never bend. Michael Caine, the long, brutal road to becoming a legend. Michael Caine didn't burst onto the screen, he edged into it. His very first film appearance back in 1950 was a blink-and-you'll-miss-it walk-on in Morning Departure. No credit, no spotlight, just a body passing through a frame, and that set the tone for the years that followed. Nothing was handed to him cleanly. Everything came with friction. A few years later, still scrambling, still unknown, he spotted an advert in the stage while in Horsham, Sussex. The job wasn't glamorous. Assistant stage manager. Bit parts. Whatever needed doing. The Westminster Repertory Company was performing out of the Carfax Electric Theatre, and Caine took the work because work was work. Around this time, he tried on a new name, Michael Scott, and in July 1953, he landed a role as the drunkard Hindley in Wuthering Heights. It wasn't stardom, but it was real acting, on a real stage, in front of real people. At 21, he moved again, this time to the Lowestoft Repertory Company in Suffolk, a year that would matter more than it probably felt at the time. He performed relentlessly. 9 plays at the Arcadia Theatre, grinding through roles with Jackson Stanley's standard players. It was there he met Patricia Haynes, his first wife. It was also there he learnt what the job actually demanded. Later, he would describe those early years bluntly. Brutal, more like purgatory than paradise. No romance, no shortcuts, just survival. By 1954, his career dragged him back to London, and almost immediately, he hit another wall. His agent told him there was already a Michael Scott working in the city. The name had to go. Immediately. Standing in a telephone booth in Leicester Square, staring out at the chaos, he noticed the Caine Mutiny playing at the Odeon. That was it. Michael Caine. Chosen on the spot. Later, he joked that if he'd looked a few feet to the left, he might have been Michael Mutiny, or worse, Michael 101 Dalmatians. Funny in hindsight, life-defining in the moment. Work came, but slowly. Small television roles. A court orderly here, a BBC adaptation there. He even appeared in the Caine Mutiny Court-Martial in 1958. A strange full-circle moment for a name chosen out of panic. Around the same time, he moved in with another rising Cockney actor, Terence Stamp, and started orbiting the same late-night London scene as Peter O'Toole. He became O'Toole's understudy in The Long and the Short and the Tall. When O'Toole left to film Lawrence of Arabia, Caine stepped in and carried the role on a 4-month tour across the UK and Ireland. This was how momentum was built back then. Someone left, you stayed ready. His early film work didn't shout either. In A Hill in Korea, he was just one private among many, sharing the screen with George Baker, Harry Andrews, Stanley Baker, and others who already knew how the machine worked. He balanced film with television, popping up in Dixon, Of Doc Green, Escape, and Mr. Charlesworth. Roles came and went, faces blurred, but his didn't disappear. The real shift came on stage. Next Time I'll Sing to You, a Cockney comedy. A role called Meph. Something clicked. The play landed, critics noticed, Theatre World featured it. And backstage at the Criterion in Piccadilly, Stanley Baker paid him a visit. Baker told him about a film he was producing. Zulu. There was a role for a Cockney private. Caine went to meet director Cy Endfield. Too late, the part had already gone to James Booth. Booth, Enfield said, looked more Cockney. Then came the pivot. Enfield studied Caine properly and said something that would change everything. He didn't look like a Cockney at all. He looked like an officer. Upper class. Snobbish. Enfield offered him a screen test. Caine pushed back just enough, promising he could do a posh accent. He tested badly. Still, Enfield gave him the part. An American director, uninterested in British class rules, saw something the system hadn't. Zulu was shot over 14 long weeks in South Africa in 1963. When the cast returned to England, another rug was pulled out from under him. Producer Joseph E. Levine had signed him to a 7-year contract, then released him just as quickly. Levine told him flatly that he didn't look right on screen, gave the contract to Booth instead. Another dead end, another restart. But Caine didn't fold. His agent landed him Horatio in Hamlet at Elsinore, opposite Christopher Plummer. It would be the only classical role of his career. He had no formal dramatic training, so he leaned into what he had. He later admitted he chose to play Horatio with a quiet ambiguity, using what others had called a flaw as texture instead. What followed was deliberate contrast. He moved away from polished accents and leaned into his own voice. His Cockney sound cut through British cinema at a time when refinement was still the rule. The Ipcress file sealed it. Harry Palmer wasn't smooth or obedient. He was sharp, suspicious, and working class, and audiences locked in. Then came Alfie. Loud, sexual, unapologetic. It didn't just make him a star. It carried him across the Atlantic and earned him his first Oscar nomination. Years later, he would say it was his favorite film because it changed everything. Hollywood followed. Gambit, a hotel room at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Advice from John Wayne himself. Speak slow, speak low. Caine never forgot it. Roles stacked quickly after that. The Italian Job turned him into a cultural fixture. One line, one moment. Quoted endlessly. Debated forever. The ending is still argued over decades later. He didn't slow down. Carter hardened his image. Sleuth sharpened it. The Man Who Would Be King paired him with Sean Connery in a partnership critics still praise. Directors trusted him. Houston let him improvise. Few actors got that freedom. The 1970s weren't perfect. Some choices were questioned. Some films missed badly. Caine never pretended otherwise. He joked about taking jobs for money and meant it. Then came the 1980s, and with them, a recalibration. Educating Rita brought awards. Hannah and Her Sisters brought an Oscar. The performance aged well, deepening with time. He followed it with charm in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, showing he could still glide when needed. Not everything landed. Jaws, The Revenge didn't. He never denied it, but he loved the house it paid for. That honesty became part of his legend. The 1990s were uneven again until Little Voice reset the board. Another Golden Globe, another Oscar with the Cider House Rules, and then something unexpected. Alfred Pennyworth, the backbone of the Dark Knight trilogy. Older now, steadier, trusted. By then, the accent that once held him back had become his signature. British cool, exported intact. Not softened, not corrected, just carried forward. Michael Caine didn't rise by fitting in. He lasted by refusing to. By the time he reached that point, the work was steady, the reputation sealed, and the voice that once held him back had become his calling card. He had survived the misses, outlasted the doubt, and learned how to stand still inside a career that never stopped moving. On screen, he looked settled, certain, in control. Off-screen, his life still hadn't found its center, the one woman who changed Michael Caine's entire life. Before the great love arrived, Michael Caine lived a life that moved quickly and rarely paused. His first marriage came early, long before fame fully settled in. In 1954, he married actress Patricia Haynes. They were young, ambitious, and still figuring themselves out. The marriage lasted 4 years. In that time, they welcomed a daughter, Dominique, born in August 1957. By 1958, it was over. Not dramatic, not scandalous, just unfinished. What followed was a stretch that matched the era. The 1960s swept Caine up as his career surged, and his personal life reflected the same momentum. He dated widely and visibly. Adina Ronay, Nancy Sinatra, Natalie Wood, Candice Bergen, Bianca Jagger, Jill St. John, Elizabeth Ursi, Françoise Pascal. It looked glamorous, it sounded exciting, but none of it anchored him. These were moments, not a landing place. Then, in 1971, something very different happened. Not at a party, not backstage, not under flashing lights, at home, on the sofa. Watching television, a Maxwell House coffee advert came on, and there she was, Shakira Baksh, calm, radiant, impossible to miss. Caine later admitted there was no slow burn, no gradual interest. He saw her and decided instantly that he had to meet her. He would later say she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, and in that moment, he made a private promise to himself that he wasn't going to let the thought pass. Shakira wasn't just a face on a screen. She had already made her mark, crowned Miss Guyana in 1967, third place at Miss World the same year. A model, an actress, a presence that didn't need explanation. She was living in London, and once Caine learned that detail, the chase began. Not reckless, focused, determined, he asked around, tracked down her number, and called. More than once. Persistence eventually paid off. Their first date took place at a fashionable London restaurant. No spectacle, no headline, just two people sitting across from each other, discovering that the connection was real and immediate. Caine would later say he fell in love at first sight, not metaphorically, literally. She was everything he had imagined, and nothing he had expected. From there, things moved quickly, but not carelessly. By January 8, 1973, they were married. The ceremony was private, almost understated, attended only by those closest to them. At a time when Caine's career was expanding rapidly and Shakira's own modeling and acting work demanded attention, they chose something quieter, a partnership, a home base. Shakira didn't just enter his life, she changed its rhythm. Where there had once been excess, she brought balance. Where there had been noise, she brought calm. Friends noticed it. Caine felt it. He stopped drifting. He stayed. Together, they welcomed a daughter, Natasha Halima. Dominique, from Caine's first marriage, remained part of his life too. The family wasn't divided. It was blended. Shakira took on the role fully, raising Natasha while supporting Caine through the highs and the stretches where the work wasn't kind. She became the constant behind the scenes, the one presence that didn't change as everything else did. Over the years, Caine never softened the truth about what Shakira meant to him. He credited her openly with saving his life. Without her, he admitted, he would likely have drunk himself to death. Not a dramatic line, a sober assessment, the kind that only comes with hindsight. Their marriage endured, decade after decade, through premieres, awards, criticism, reinvention. In a world where celebrity relationships tend to burn out quickly, theirs settled into something steady and real. Shakira stood beside him at events, never overshadowing him, never disappearing either, always there. When asked about the secret to their success, Caine didn't offer poetry. He offered practicality, 2 bathrooms, space, privacy, respect. Love didn't mean sharing every inch of air. It meant giving each other room to exist fully. On anniversaries, he spoke with the same clarity. They listened to each other. They supported each other. They loved each other. They split their time between London and Miami, traveled together, and cherished the quiet moments most. The ordinary ones, the ones no one sees. Caine has called marrying Shakira the best decision he ever made. He's described her as his rock, his confidant, his inspiration, his soulmate. He has never revised that opinion. Not once. After more than 5 decades, his certainty hasn't dimmed. She wasn't just the love of his life. She was the life that finally stayed. Michael Caine's most controversial beliefs. For someone with a career as long and revered as Michael Caine's, controversy was never going to stay away forever. Not because he chased it, but because he never learned how to dodge it. Caine has always spoken the way he lives. Direct, unpolished, occasionally uncomfortable. And when it came to politics and morality, he never tried to soften the edges. He once described himself as a left-wing Tory, a phrase that confused people until he explained it. His politics weren't theoretical. They lived, shaped by a working-class upbringing and sharpened by his service in the Korean War. He believed in responsibility, structure, and fairness. But he also distrusted systems that felt detached from real life. That contradiction followed him everywhere. During the height of his Hollywood years, Caine lived in Beverly Hills. It looked like the dream, but it didn't feel right. Taxes in the UK had climbed steeply, and eventually he left. Years later, when Margaret Thatcher lowered them, he returned. He never pretended it was a simple decision. He said he didn't mind paying tax. What bothered him was the imbalance, the sense that money was being taken without visible care for the streets, the people, or the dignity of everyday life. He once remarked that he wasn't interested in living in a country where you could glide past visible suffering in luxury and pretend it was normal. By 2009, his opinions were sharper and more public. After releasing Harry Brown, a film steeped in urban anger and moral breakdown, Caine called for the return of national service, not as punishment, as a purpose. He said young people needed belonging, not just discipline, structure, not violence. It wasn't a popular stance. He didn't retreat. That same year, he openly criticized the Labour government under Gordon Brown for introducing a 50% tax rate on top earners. He even threatened to leave the country again if taxes rose further. Some called it tone-deaf. Others called it honest. Caine didn't correct either side. In the lead-up to the 2010 general election, he publicly backed the Conservative Party and appeared alongside David Cameron to launch a voluntary civilian national service program for teenagers. Still, he made a point of reminding people that he had supported New Labour under Tony Blair in 1997. Loyalty for him was never blind. It shifted with circumstance. Then came Brexit. In 2016, Caine voted to leave the European Union. He didn't frame it as triumph or rebellion. He called himself a reluctant leaver. He admitted both options scared him, but he said he would rather be a poor master than a rich servant. That line stuck. It summed up how he viewed control, sovereignty, and dignity, not abstract ideals, personal ones. Even in his 90s, he didn't retreat into silence. In November 2024, after Keir Starmer took office earlier that year, Caine shared a petition calling for a new general election. No long explanation, no manifesto, just a signal that he was still watching, still engaged, still unwilling to fade quietly into approval. But the most unsettling controversy didn't come from politics. It came from a confession. In a 2010 interview, Caine spoke about his father's death from liver cancer in 1955. Doctors had told the family he had only days left. Caine said he asked a doctor to help end his father's suffering. He spoke in support of voluntary euthanasia, not as a philosophical debate, but as a son remembering a moment of helplessness. It wasn't said lightly, and it wasn't dressed up. It landed hard because it was deeply personal. That admission divided people instantly. Some were shocked, others quietly understood. Caine didn't campaign on it. He didn't revisit it often. He simply stated what he had lived through and what he believed compassion looked like in that moment. Across decades, across governments, across moral fault lines, Michael Caine never tried to be agreeable. He chose to be honest, sometimes warmly, sometimes bluntly, always from experience rather than ideology. That's the through line. Not controversy for its own sake, but a man who refused to pretend he didn't have an opinion, even when that opinion made people uncomfortable. The secret Michael Caine kept hidden for 45 years. For decades, Michael Caine lived in full view of the public without ever truly letting the public all the way in. Not because he was guarding a scandal, not because there was some explosive truth waiting to detonate, but because he understood something early on that most people don't learn until it's too late. Privacy isn't secrecy, it's survival. He let people believe they knew him. The voice, the confidence, the jokes that landed clean and sharp. He gave interviews that sparkled, stories that felt generous, opinions that sounded settled. But there were rooms in his life he kept closed, deliberately, and he kept them closed for nearly half a century. He rarely spoke about how fragile his early life actually was. Caine often joked about growing up poor in South London, turning hardship into punchlines the way working-class men of his generation were taught to do. But he didn't linger on the instability beneath it. His father was gone for long stretches. His mother struggled to hold things together. During the war, he was evacuated and sent to live with strangers as a child. Uprooted from everything familiar, those years carved him deeply. But for a long time, he chose humor over honesty. The grit was visible. The scars stayed private. He also downplayed fear, especially the fear of falling back into nothing. Early success never made him feel safe. Fame didn't feel permanent. It felt borrowed, temporary. That anxiety sat quietly under the swagger, and it shaped his choices more than he admitted at the time. It's why he said yes to roles other actors would have turned down. Not because he lacked taste, but because he understood precarity. Critics mocked some of those films. He laughed along. What he didn't say out loud was that security mattered more to him than prestige ever did. Emotional vulnerability stayed off stage for years. In interviews, he was charming and generous, but rarely raw. He didn't talk openly about grief while it was happening. He didn't unpack loneliness in real time, the deaths of close friends, the creeping fear of aging, the quiet terror of becoming irrelevant. Those reflections came later, mostly in memoirs, when the pressure to perform an image had finally loosened its grip. He also hid how intentional his so-called bad films really were. For years, he brushed them off with jokes about houses and bills, as if it were all careless and lighthearted. What he didn't unpack until much later was how strategic that mindset was. He separated art from survival. That separation protected him. It kept bitterness at bay, but it also kept him guarded. He wasn't pretending every role mattered. He was pretending it didn't hurt when some of them didn't. And then there was his marriage. Unlike many actors of his era, Caine guarded it fiercely. No public mess, no confessions sold for headlines, no spectacle. That wasn't accidental. He had watched fame chew through relationships up close and decided early that some things would not be consumed. Love for him was not content. What Michael Caine kept hidden wasn't scandal. It was effort. He made calm look effortless, longevity look casual, aging looks manageable. But underneath that ease was discipline, fear, and a very clear understanding of how easily everything could disappear. When it came to his health, the story was never dramatic. There was no collapse, no single diagnosis that changed everything overnight. Just time doing what time always does. As he moved into his late 80s and early 90s, Caine became more open about physical limitations. Walking grew difficult. Balance weakened. A cane became necessary. Standing for long stretches was no longer possible. For an actor, that isn't a minor inconvenience. Film sets demand endurance, repetition, and movement, even when roles appear gentle on screen. He spoke honestly about stamina loss, too. Not everyday tiredness, but the kind where energy doesn't return. Short workdays drained him. Recovery stretched longer. Minor illnesses lingered. That changes how you measure risk, especially when your craft depends on physical presence. What mattered most to him was clarity. His mind, he insisted, remained sharp. His wit was intact. His memory is clear. This wasn't cognitive decline. It was physical limitation. And that distinction mattered deeply. He didn't want to be propped up, doubled, or protected by camera tricks. To him, that felt dishonest. By the time he made The Great Escaper, released in 2023, he already suspected it would be his last role. The film was designed to be gentle, but the strain confirmed what he knew. He later said, plainly, that if you can't walk properly, you can't act properly. And if you can't act properly, it's time to stop. There was no scandalous reveal, no emergency announcement, no hidden illness uncovered later. Just age. He didn't frame it as tragedy. He framed it as reality. Pushing further would have meant diminishing the work and the dignity he valued more than applause. So he listened to his body when it spoke. Since stepping away, His life has narrowed in the best way. Writing, painting, privacy. The interviews he gives now are steady. The humor is still there. The voice hasn't wavered. What ended his career wasn't mystery or collapse. It was a clear-eyed decision to stop before erosion set in. In the end, Michael Caine didn't lose himself. He simply understood when holding on no longer made sense. What are your thoughts on Michael Caine and his movies? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.